All right, we're pretty much done with the functionality, but before we can start working on next project, basically before we can call it a day, let's fix some nagging bugs. Now, in this video, we will refactor some code, so please stay vigilant. And first, I actually want to remove that scroll code. Which one am I talking about? Well, this one over here, because basically what happens since we run this on initial render, effectively loading will be always false. And if that doesn't make any sense right now, you'll see once we set up the new code. So what I want you to do is just take this over here and remove it, and we'll create one from the scratch. Now the next step is setting up the default page to 1. So if I navigate to the big screen, you'll notice something interesting where, yes, we can make the API call with that 0 page, and life is beautiful. But you'll notice that, and actually this is the case where I actually need to go back. Sorry, leave your code removed, but in my case, I'm going to actually add that, just so you can see that once we go back here and once we fetch, yes, now we fetch which page number 1, and effectively they're the same images. So in order to fix that, we actually need to go with page 1 as default. So let me navigate back. I'll still remove the scroll code because we'll have to refactor that one, create from the scratch. And then, like I said, we're going to go with page number 1 by default. So that way we can avoid getting those duplicate images. So that's step number 1. Now, second thing that I want to do, let me double check my list, was to, or this was, I guess, already third one, set up 2 use effects. Now, reason for that is because we'll use the second one for the scroll functionality. For now, we have only one where we have use effect, and every time the page state value changes, as well as the initial render, we fetch images. So let's set up another use effect, which we're going to use when we trigger the scroll. So let's set up over here, and we're going to do that on initial render only for the time being. Eventually, there's going to be a state value here as well. But what's interesting with this use effect, I actually don't want to run this on initial render. So yes, eventually there's going to be a state value here, and we'll set that one up in a second. But now, if I'm going to go with second inifam console log, you'll notice that basically I'll have that second one, correct? So I fetched the images, and now we're using, of course, the page number 1. So that is correct. But I can also see this second console log in the DevTools. And how we can avoid that? Well, what we could do is set up a useref. And remember, one of the things about the useref is the fact that it is not triggering the re-render. And then I can check, hey, is this the initial render? Or this is already the second, third, and whatever. And again, the goal here is following, where this one will run on initial render, and every time we update the state page value, correct? Every time we'll fetch those images. Now with this one, I only want to run that on second, third, and hopefully you get the gist, renders. So all the renders apart from the initial one. And how we can set that up? Like I said, we're going to use useref. So navigate here, say useref, then we'll scroll down, and first we'll just come up with a name. In my case, I'm going to say mounted. And that will be equal to a useref, and by default it's going to be false. And then we scroll down, and where we have the use effect, now I want to check what is the value for the mounted one. And remember, when it comes to useref, it's actually sitting in the current, correct? So if I go here with if, and then mounted and current, so effectively if this is false, then I want to set it equal to true, and also return, you'll notice that it's not going to run on initial render. So essentially, I have here mounted. Yes, it will run, but it will stop with that return. So we won't see that second one in a console. So let's save that. Let's go back, and now notice, once I refresh, I see nothing in the console. So this will only run on the renders after the initial one. Hopefully that is clear. And now let's deal with the input. So we fixed this one. We set up the second one. And now I want to check for query value. So I only want to fetch. There's actually something typed here in the inbox. And I also need to deal with pages because now our initial value is 1, correct? And then eventually we'll work with scroll functionality. So let's go to our, I believe it was handle submit, correct? So we are preventing the default. All right, that's awesome. How can we prevent fetching images if there's no query? Because at the moment, what you'll notice that we cannot fetch any images. And the reason for that, because we're not changing the page. Remember, our fetch images depends on a page, correct? And now since our default one is 1, and in here we're setting equal to 1, of course, nothing is happening. But if I'll change this around to 2, and if I go to the big screen, again, I'm doing that just so it's easier to see, you'll notice that even if my input is empty, I'm still fetching something. And that's not what I want. So in order to fix that, we need to go back over here and we need to check, well, what's happening with the query? So I'm going to say if there is no query, so essentially if it is empty, then I simply want to return. That's all I need to do. And again, let's try it out with page 2, even though I'll fix this code in a second as well. And now you'll notice that if I have empty input, well, we cannot fetch images. And only if something is there, then we can actually fetch some images. So that's the first thing we need to be aware of. Now, second, remember something. By default, again, our page is 1, correct? So how we can get those images if we're not changing the page? And I think it's going to be easier just to showcase something where if the page is 1, and if I go here and if I type a dog, nothing is going to happen, correct? Same is going to be with cat and all that. Again, the reason for that is because my default value, my state value for the entire thing is actually 1, right? So that's how everything is set up. So if I go to the app, notice my page is 1. So how we can fix this? Well, what we could do is check the page value. And if the page value is 1, then just fetch images. Again, we're only going to do that if there's some query. So hopefully this is going to make sense where I'm going to say if page is equal to 1, then I want to fetch images like so. And if not, then I just want to go with set page 1. And basically what this is going to allow me to do, so I'm going to go here with dog. Notice now we're actually fetching those images, even if the page is 1. So we hit this condition. If the page is 1, well, then just fetch images. And as I said, I shouldn't have passed here 1. I don't know why I did that. So notice we're fetching correctly, whether that's cat, whether that is a dog, and hopefully you get the gist. Now, if there's nothing there, for example, if I just remove everything, notice I cannot fetch. And if I just change something around, let's say I add another entry, I will start with that first one. So in here, eventually, as we're scrolling, we'll be adding those page values, correct? So even though at the moment I have only 1, as we start scrolling now, we don't have the scroll functionality, but in general, we'll be adding those numbers, 1, 2, 3, and whatever. So if I'll change here in the input from dog to cat, actually this is going to work because it will set that page equal to 1. And optionally, we can also add here return. Just keep in mind that we're running this if the page is equal to 1. So this doesn't really matter whether we run this set page 1 after it or not, because since this is 1, it's not going to affect anything at the end of the day anyway. But just to have a cleaner code, let's go here with the return where we don't invoke this set page if the page is already equal to 1.